are joined by Professor Trish Greenhalgh, who is from the University of Oxford, who says, yes, wear a mask when you can't social distance and you're running. Former Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Tom Watson, who says he wouldn't be able to run with a mask, and Professor Devi Sridhar, who says wear them on crowded pavements, but not when you're in an empty park. So let's start with Professor Trish Greenhalgh. It's very good to see you, Professor Greenhalgh. You do go out running and you do wear a mask. Now, I know you are an expert, but the body of experts at the World Health Organization say it's actually not a good idea because that mask can get wet, it can get full of microbial nasties, and actually it's not very good for you when you are running. So why do you wear one?
Well, the World Health Organization has dragged their feet over masks. They were advising against masks for a long time, and then they changed their minds. And I'm not sure that particular recommendation by the WHO does represent expert opinion. There is no doubt the virus is in the air. There is no doubt that you can catch it if you inhale air that someone else has exhaled. And as Piers described beautifully, the exercising jogger, the puffing and panting jogger, you can feel their breath come, and you can sometimes actually feel yourself inhale it. So there's no doubt that there is a danger there. I do agree that wet, soggy masks are not a good idea. But for goodness sake, I've been for a run this morning. Not only did I put my T-shirt in the wash, but I put my mask in the wash as well. So the fact that they get, contaminated is not a reason for not wearing them. It's not that you're going to do anything with that mask apart from wash it. The other thing to say is that 40% of COVID cases happen by catching it from people who have no symptoms. So you're jogging along, you think you're fine, and then the next day you develop symptoms of COVID, but you've actually breathed that COVID onto someone, perhaps, an old lady walking a dog or something like that. So I think it's really important to be
Okay, well, look, let's bring in Tom Watson. I mean, you lost famously 8 stone by getting fit and dieting well and so on. You have a different view about this, don't you?
Yeah, look, I think for millions of people in the country in lockdown through winter, the only thing they've had is running. I'm part of an online group, Persons of Positivity. We keep ourselves going by supporting each other online. And I don't think I could do a run with a mask on, Piers. It's hard enough for me to run without a mask.
Do you run along high streets?
I've actually changed my run. I think the professor
I'll tell you why I asked that. I have a real problem along my high street with watching. I have a problem with them in the normal times, non-pandemic times. There's something so narcissistic about these people running, especially if they're not very fit and they can't run very well, and they're sort of bouncing along the high street, barging into everybody. If you're a triathlete, fine, you zip by in 5 seconds, but the one that sort of go past like a giant snail.
Well, hang on, aren't those people the people who need to be out running?
So I have an inherent problem with joggers on high street. I think it's the ultimate show-off nonsense, gorilla beating and so on. But in a pandemic, I have a bigger problem, which is, you say, it doesn't help you when you're running and you want to get fit. What about my right not to be infected with COVID-19 as I walk along my high street by some panting, wheezing show-off?
That's basically me you're describing there, Piers. I'm glad we're not...
I didn't want to use the exact, directive to you, but you get my point.
Yeah. I think that the strict rule that should be enforced is social distancing. If you're a runner, you should know, and the professor's right, you're breathing more deeply, and you should try and not run into people or run near them.
Okay.
For me,
well,
I've changed my...
It's not always possible, is it, to socially distance? And frankly, when the weather's as good as it was at the weekend, it's almost impossible to keep your distance. Professor Devi Sridhar, you also regularly run. You tell us the benefits of going out into the fresh air, but also the point you make repeatedly is that the risks of transmission outdoors are pretty minimal. So when we do walk past someone who is huffing and puffing in our face, how likely are we to pick up a case of COVID?
Well, it really depends how close they are to you and how heavily they're breathing. And I agree completely with Trish that actually, this can spread through the air. And so it is important that think runners should think, and I do think, where am I running? And I'm trying to be attentive to pedestrians, because the sidewalks are there for pedestrians in busy areas and high streets. If you're out in a park, then take off your mask and run freely. So I think we need some consideration for each other right now. We're in a pandemic, and just, think how it feels for other people. If you're going to cycle in a busy area, wear a mask.
I would make it illegal for joggers to run along high streets. I would, with lots of pedestrians. I think it's just completely madness in a pandemic, and I would say they can do it slowly if they wear the mask, but you've got to wear a mask on high streets.
Professor
I get the wider park issue is a different thing.
Yeah, Professor Greenhouse, you wear one when you're running. You've already said that the World Health Organization has dragged its feet over masks. We know this government, for whatever reason, dragged its feet over masks. You've been a pioneering voice for masks from very early on. But I wonder if the answer is not that we mandate that runners and exercisers wear masks, but you simply say to people, look, if you're worried about walking past somebody who's running, perhaps you should wear the mask.
Well, there is an argument that people who are vulnerable should be wearing. I think unless it's changed recently, the current advice to anyone over 60, for example, is to wear a mask for your own protection. But I think Tom, I've always admired Tom Watson. I think his story of losing that amount of weight, curing himself of all these risk factors is absolutely phenomenal. And I take my hat off to Tom. But I would say that I've got a mask here, what we call a gaiter, sort of like a buff, and you can pull it up and pull it down. I've got it here. This is the one I wore this morning. It just sort of goes up and goes down. And that takes 2 seconds to do. So I totally agree with Debbie. Wear it when you're going along, jogging past Piers on the high street. Take it off when you get to the park. It's what I did this morning. It's not difficult.
You know what?
Take a mask in
Tom
case
Watson,
you jog past Piers
It comes
Morgan.
down to what Her Majesty the Queen said about vaccines, doesn't it? It's about thinking of others, not just yourself and your own comfort.
Yeah.
Seems to me you want to charge along like an unrestrained slimline rhino, but you don't want to think about me and my health.
I'm the slowest runner in the world, and if I do get close to someone, I stop and move out the way. But I tell you what I'm going to do, because the professor's on, I'm going to try the mask today, and I'll tell you how I get on trying to run with it. But I think my glasses will steam up. I think I'll find it really hard, but I'll give it a go.
Professor Greenhouse, it's lovely to have you back on the programme, and I think your work on masks has been remarkable and has really changed people's views on it. You have spoken out recently about the fact that you sadly lost your mum to COVID at the end of last year, before her chance of getting a vaccine, which is a terrible irony, of course. How are you doing at the moment? You've been such a vocal speaker in this pandemic, and then you are personally affected by the tragedy and the loss.
Yeah, it was hard, but then I'm not the only one to have gone through it. Over 100,000 people have died. It's been pretty miserable for everyone, but it does bring home to me that this pandemic is real. I never doubted the statistics, but when it affects you and your own family, I also lost an aunt to COVID. And these are people who are innocent. They haven't done anything wrong, but somehow they've inhaled some air that someone else has exhaled. And I think we all need to take a bit of responsibility to that. I don't want to be a killjoy. I agree. I'm fed up with lockdown, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we all need to use our imagination so that we can have our freedoms as much as possible, but not put other people's lives at risk.
Well, I think that's so true. And Professor Reid, the efficacy data that's coming out from Pfizer and the AstraZeneca vaccines yesterday was incredibly encouraging. These are, it seems to me, A, very safe vaccines, but secondly, incredibly effective. We've really lucked out with this thanks to the brilliance of our scientists.
Definitely. I think vaccines are a real cause for optimism, and the effectiveness data in reducing hospitalizations and deaths, and now even stopping transmission, are better than any of us could have imagined. I mean, when the polio vaccine was discovered, there were parades in the street. People celebrated the scientific discovery. And I hope at some point in the future, when we vaccinated everyone and we're back to some normality, we can really appreciate this. This is like world changing in terms of having these vaccines as a way out of this pandemic.
Well, it's world saving, isn't it, in many ways, because there'd never been, before this pandemic, any coronavirus vaccine. And then suddenly we have a whole host of them, and they're all apparently fantastic. So thank you to our panel. Tom, mask up, because if I see you charging towards me on my high street, there's going to be a confrontation that you will regret. And thank you to our professors. We appreciate it very much indeed.